I tend to be over-prepared. Personally, that's me. I tend to be over-prepared, and perhaps at times God has to rattle me so I'm not trusting in a human mechanism of notes and preparation, and He needs to unsettle me.
Right.
And just go, okay, come on, Slick, follow me.
Right.
And you walk in that, and then you know God gets all the credit for that because it sure wasn't me. He probably needs to do that with me from time to time.
Welcome to Wind and Word. We are so glad that you are here today, and thank you for joining us. We are happy to have Reverend Scott Graham, the General Secretary of the United Pentecostal Church International, with us today. Wind and Word. Welcome, Brother Graham.
Thank you. I'm delighted. This will be a fun time.
We're so glad that you're here, and we appreciate you taking the time to just sit down and chat with our audience. And we want to talk a little bit about preaching. You have served in many capacities within the United Pentecostal Church. You've been a district superintendent. You were a district youth president, international youth president. You've had a lot of hats, and now you're general secretary. But all of them really, I think you could say, evolves around the pulpit ministry and having that as the main part of your early ministry. And, of course, as it has developed, you're one of the most sought-after speakers within our organization. How did you first feel your call to the ministry?
Well, I grew up in church, and I'm thankful for that. I have often teased that my earliest memories are waking up in church, having slept on my dad's Bible, and I've got red letter edition stamped across my cheek for about 30 minutes. So this is as far back as I can think. I remember church roots. Growing up through high school, I think probably first began to kind of wrestle with the concept, maybe 16 years old, 17 at that season. You're coming into the latter years of high school. What's my future going to look like? And I can, in reflection, I can remember kind of wrestling with that struggle. What's it look like? It hadn't really come to grips with it yet. Left high school and went to University of Illinois, was studying computer engineering, and was having a ball. I can't deny it. I loved it. It was academically challenging, and it was a burgeoning field. Back then nobody had home computers, but you could kind of see that coming. And so I was excited about it. I loved it. I even had a job offer at the end of my freshman year. Hewlett-Packard was on campus for a job fair for the seniors, and I had a physics professor that recommended me for this program they had for summer internships through your college years, and then a job when you get out. And so I left my freshman year of college. I'm set. I had a full ride scholarship that was paying everything, and I've got this job waiting on me when I get out that was going to start at probably the equivalent of a six-figure salary today. I got the world on the string. And I went to youth camp in Illinois, 19 years old. Anthony Mangun preached it, and on Tuesday night he preached a message titled "My Obligation to My Generation." Wow. And he just tore me to pieces. And I crawled to the altar, and in the most literal physical sense. I was sitting in the front row, and I crawled to the altar, and crucified all kinds of things. Got home and turned in my scholarship, called Hewlett-Packard, told them I wasn't coming, withdrew from the University of Illinois, enrolled at Gateway College of Evangelism, St. Louis, and the whole world shifted that night. Wow. That was the night I came to grips with it. It would be a little intellectually dishonest not to acknowledge I had been wrestling and struggling with that whole thing before that moment, but that was the night I came to grips with it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it seems like for all of us there's those seminal moments where we really can point to where we made a decision that not my will but Thy will be done.
I think in terms of ministry, you better have that moment you can go back to because of some of the challenges, difficult seasons you're going to face. You need to be able to go back to that anchor point. We say, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing because, boy, absent that, I've gone back to that spot. I literally physically went back to that spot one day on the campground.
Yeah,
I drove up there just to go back to that spot, have another prayer meeting.
Wow,
yeah,
that's neat.
So I think both figuratively and in my case literally, you need that moment you can go back to. I believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to young people that maybe are wrestling with a call like, I want to make sure it's God and not just my desire? How do you know for sure that calling is?
Oh, those wonderful laying in bed at night, what's the will of God moments. Those are real. I think what I would offer is, first of all, the Bible has a very unique phrase. And I realize it's not expressing this in the context of vocational ministry. I get that. It's talking just for all of us. It has this phrase, this is the will of God, even your sanctification. Now, I know he was using it in terms of moral integrity in that particular moment, but the first thing I would say is you just be sanctified to God first. Your first call, this is the will of God, that you be sanctified to him, which is both a setting apart from corruption and a setting apart to sacred things. So the first step to pursuing, and I believe in the will of God unfolding in your life, is just on a personal level, set yourself apart from anything unclean, set yourself apart to the purpose of God, the work of God, both those kinds of things. When we do that on this just individual level, I refuse to believe that God plays cat and mouse with what he wants for your future. Right. I don't think God intends to frustrate you by dangling something out there and just say, boy, we'll see if he finds it. That makes him petty. So while we struggle sometimes, I do believe if you're sanctified to him, if you're set apart to him, he'll unfold this. He'll bring you a moment of clarity. He'll bring a message, a prophetic word, a dream, something. He won't leave you floundering. That's unfair. He's building his kingdom, and if he wants to use you to do that, I think it's almost I don't know. It just seems silly to think that he's gonna hide what he wants you to do and then just sit back and go, I wonder if he'll figure that out. Right. I do think you can trust that he's going to make it clear. He's going to pursue it. So, in terms of the checks to how do I make sure that this is not me and it's him, I think the voice of your spiritual leadership is huge. Stay close to your pastor. Stay close to those who have spiritual influence in your life. Guard carefully who additionally you let have voices in your life. And just keep your heart pure toward your motives. I'm not after this for ego. I'm certainly not after this for money. I'm not after this for status. I'm not after and if you can purge out those impure motives, I really just think God cares enough about you as an individual and about his kingdom. He'll give you that moment that it becomes clear.
Amen. So good. And then when you started Bible school, did you start preaching right away?
Oh, I preached my first time when I was, I think, 19, and I really had always joked about, thank God there were no recordings, and then recently it surfaced. My sister had a cassette. My sister passed away a couple years ago, and in going through some of her stuff, her daughter found this cassette. I was there physically when she found it. She said, look at this, she's got a tape. That's how long ago it was, a cassette tape. Yeah, absolutely. She's got a cassette tape. If you preach, Scott, and I looked at it, it was a title, that first horrific message. I was like, oh, dear, help us. I didn't, in Bible school, you certainly have preaching classes and there's chapels and outreach things and stuff that I did a little bit, but it was more upon graduating. Once I graduated and married and became youth pastor, then, in chapel service, we had a Christian school, chapel services school, youth services. That's really the first time I was in the pulpit much.
What would you say is the percentage of preaching that is natural and is learned?
Well, boy, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I've been asked that directly. I do think that's going to vary a lot by people. That's to me, that's somewhat like saying, what's the percentage of playing the piano that's natural versus learned? Well, there are going to be some people who have a very natural inclination toward playing the piano. There's going to be others that don't and really have to master it through repetitive practice. So there are certain giftings that lend itself in some individuals toward a particular skill set. But I won't back away from preaching is an acquired skill. Communication, the art of public speaking, and I know, I get it, to say public speaking and preaching, those are not synonymous terms. I'll accept that. But they're not totally independent of each other either. Right. So I do think there's going to be some people who just have an inherent comfort level in front of a crowd, who have a greater degree of eloquence than someone else. But there's two aspects of it. The person who has that gifting can't just rely on that crutch and say, well, I don't need to get better. Right. I'm good at this. I have a gift at this. The person who doesn't have that natural inclination can't use that as an excuse. Well, I just can't do that. Well, get better at it. Work at it. Learn the skills. So I don't know if there's a fixed percentage. It's going to vary, I think, in every person. But on either side of that ledger, whether you have a natural inclination that way or it's something you're really just going to have to practice and learn, both are doable. Yeah.
Probably everybody starts out being uncomfortable with preaching.
Probably.
Even the Bible says it's through the foolishness of preaching that he's chosen to save the law. Certainly we all feel foolish at times. But, we talked about having that really that definitive point where you feel called, is there a specific place that you can think of in your early ministry where you were like, okay, I can handle this?
You know, it's funny you say that. That's interesting. I have reflected on this. I think probably the first time, I could take you to the church and the pulpit, where probably for the first time, well, that's not even probably. I'll back off that word. Where the first time I felt that legitimate unction of anointing and operated in it, and it flowed, and it wasn't me, and it was something higher. And I mean, I know exactly where it was. It was in Pana, Illinois. We had an outreach from the school. The bunch of students went up there, and we did outreach around the city, and we conducted the service at music. And I was selected to preach that night. And it was the first night that it just hit. It just was there. That amazing. Oh, I had been in the pulpit before, but young and nervous and trying to struggle through how to do this. That night, it flowed. It was the first night, absolutely, that I felt that. Whew, wow, this is what that is. That was the night.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember it as vividly as because it was almost like when I got done that, I was like, what was that?
Right.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the wind at your back.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just like, I'd never had that before, which did a couple of things to me. Number one, it made me desperate to never try to do that without that.
Right.
Absolutely. I found out there's another gear, it's like you're driving a motorcycle, you found out that extra gear it goes into. And it's not about, I don't just mean about volume or, how excited I got or anything. It was the legitimate touch of God. That's a great phrase. The wind just pushed.
Right.
And I had not experienced that before that moment, but that was the night. Yeah.
That's such an amazing feeling. Can you think of a time early on in your ministry where you felt like, man, I just flopped. I just did a horrible job. And somebody comes up to you and says, that was life-changing. I was thinking about
goodness,
walking away from God, and that message changed my life.
Absolutely. Again, boy, I could go right to the moment. I'd been out of Bible school about, I didn't know, more than a couple of years. Was elected sectional youth leader in our section in Illinois, Section 4. And the Illinois district had they had a thing back at that time that they called Illinois Youth Congress. It was the idea they'd started, North American Youth Congress started in 1979. This would have been about 87 or so. And so they had a district event. Little known trivia that only you and I and guys our age remember. The original name for Youth Congress was a horrible long name. It was North American Youth Congress and Family Life Encounter. That's what it was called, which is just a ridiculously, NAYC did not roll off the tongue back then. And Illinois had one that they called Illinois District Youth Congress Family Life Encounter. And it came to our section that year in a hotel setting, or I think maybe it's a church. Anyway, they had a practice that the host sectional youth leader gets to preach a day service. And I'm telling you, my ego got so wrapped up in this thing. I'm 23. I get to preach a district meeting. Boy, it messed with me. And I had all the wrong motives. Bad of when I look back of, wanting to, this is my chance to shine. You hear the words, my chance to shine,
right.
My chance to put my name. Oh God, forgive me. I've repented of that so many times. And I got up that morning. I was sick as a horse. Like flu, something hit me. I'm so sick. And I went and preached. And Pastor, I'm telling you, God himself doesn't know what I tried to say that day, in my estimation. it was just horrible. And I crawled home from that meeting, crawled back in bed. I was so sick, and I just felt like such a failure, such a flop. And my motives were wrong, and just everything about it. The content was horrible. The delivery was sad. The whole bit. And it's like 4 months later, I'm at a youth camp service in Illinois. I wasn't doing anything. I'm just in the back. And they had some girl get up. I don't forget why she was even up there. And she talks about that night, that service, that day service. And I was about to quit. And Brother Graham preached this thing. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I literally remember that day. It's a day service at this. I'm in the back of the tabernacle. And I hear my name. I wasn't even really listening to her. I was helping with something. I don't know, cleaning up or whatever. And I heard my name. I listened. She starts talking about that day. She preached it better in 2 minutes than I did the day I preached it.
Yeah.
Changed her life.
Wow.
And that day in the back of the tabernacle, while they're going on with whatever they're doing up there, I literally got down on my knees between two of the rows of chairs back there. And I just said, God, this was never about me in the first place.
Right.
So yes, I remember that night. I just felt like I flopped, and God even the amazing thing about that, which has spoken to me, is that it wasn't just that I did a lousy job, which I did. My motives were all wrong. I was trying self-aggrandizement, trying to put my name out there, and even with my flawed motives and my rather lackluster job that I did, he still took that because of her hunger. It wasn't about me. It was her hunger. He still took that and used it to bless her, which has spoken to me through the years that has a lot more to do with their response than it does my performance.
Right.
You know, yeah. I remember that night too. Well, that was a clear moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raise that point about how much God loves the listener. So many times we think it's based on the speaker, but you know, you learn early on that it's he uses our weaknesses rather than our strengths, and how much of that is because of his love for the body.
Absolutely.
You know, in spite of ourselves, he uses the word to accomplish the purpose.
It's alive.
Yeah,
it's
even
alive.
though the vessel is not necessarily pure, it's something that God does to bless His people, you know, and that's a neat experience. When you would prepare for a sermon, is the process that you used early on in your ministry similar to the process you use now?
I can find commonalities. I mean, I hope, I trust I'm a little better at the skill set now.
Right.
I do find commonalities. There are certain components. So the idea of wanting there to be and striving for there to be one clear thesis statement, so to speak, that is the point I want to make that day. I've kind of had that practice from the outset. What is the point I want to make today? What is the singular? If everybody in the audience had to write a one sentence synopsis of what did he just preach, which I've always kind of wanted to do. I really have always thought it'd be neat to pass out a piece of paper before you start. Don't tell them what to do with it yet. Get done. Say, okay, everybody take a pen, write down in one sentence, what did I just preach? Gather those up and read them and see how unified the message is. Now, having said that, I completely recognize the Word of God is alive. It speaks to people on different levels because of where they are. So I get it. It wouldn't all be uniform. But I've always wondered how clearly did I communicate that point. So that I've tried, I think, from early on to have that kind of singular. What is the one? There's going to be ancillary points and other things. I get all that, but that element I think has probably been consistent since early days of sermon preparation. I don't think. I do think back then I was not as intentional about how I'm going to wrap it up. Jerry Jones actually taught me a thing. I heard him say this, and I thought, wow, that's so good. He said a sermon should not have a conclusion. I used to have, I'd have introduction, body, conclusion. He said you shouldn't have a conclusion, you have a closing. The difference being, you think of a car salesman, you step on the lot, when he tells you about the car and it's got this feature and it's got that, he doesn't conclude. He doesn't say, okay, thanks. He closes. He seeks a closing. He tries to close the deal,
Right.
which is his desire that I put my name on the line somehow, that I make a commitment to something. And I found that an interesting word picture, that sermons should not have conclusions. They should have closings. You try to get the hearer to close on something, to make some response, some commitment. I don't think I was quite as focused on that early on. But as far as one difference, of course, they used to be handwritten. Now they're all on the computer. But I would say the basic, one thing that's changed, you asked about commonalities, I'm doing more differences. But interestingly to me, as I reflect, even though now I have, decades more experience and probably one would think that I would need lesser amount of notes now. My notes are much more detailed now than they were when I started. I found some old handwritten notes, and my goodness, back then, if I had 2 or 3 pages, now I may have 9 or 10. My notes are much more thorough now, which is interesting, really, in one sense, that when you would think I would not need as many, perhaps because of experience, I am much more prepared now than I was when I was younger.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think as you get older and you get more experienced in ministry that you see the importance of staying very focused and not being extemporaneous?
In general,
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I just personally, there have been occasions, certainly, where I've stepped the pulpit and the Spirit just takes you and you go, down a different line, and it is much more extemporaneous than my comfort level lends toward.
Right.
I guard against that thing, and I don't know. I think years ago my pastor broke me of this. I don't know when's the last time I've gotten the pulpit and said, I was all ready to preach, the Lord just changed my mind. Because he told me something I thought was so insightful. He said, all you've just said is, I ain't been listening to God all week. He said, it's not like God got up that morning and go,
Right.
I know what he needs to say.
Right,
That's all that means is I wasn't tuned in during the week very well. So I don't very often get up and go, well, the Lord just changed my mind. There have been those occasions, certainly, where in the service you just feel prompted and you go and you follow. And maybe, it's probably a little unfair to say that's always because I wasn't listening. The Lord might be trying to get me out of my comfort zone. He may very well have withheld exactly what he's going to say until that moment to just say, you just trust me. Because I will say, the more I tend to be over-prepared on personal level. This is me.
Yeah.
I tend to be over-prepared, and perhaps at times God has to rattle me so I'm not trusting in a human mechanism of notes and preparation, and he needs to unsettle me.
Right.
And just go, okay, come on, Slick, follow me.
Right.
And you walk in that, and then God gets all the credit for that because it sure wasn't me. He probably needs to do that with me from time to time. But in general, I am equally of the mindset that if he can speak to me in the pulpit, he can speak to me at my desk.
Right.
Absolutely. I remember Brother Urshan, N.A. Urshan, told me one time that he said, I pray 2 prayers before I preach. Put your word in my heart, put your word in my mouth. So what he puts in my heart is what is in preparation. That's in the week before, that's in the 2 weeks. That's when I'm sitting and praying and studying and preparing my notes. He puts it down in my heart. But in the moment of delivery, put your word in my mouth. Bypass my mind. Just let there be something here that comes out that's prophetic, that's unction. And so I think those both have value.
Yes.
Probably err if we try to lean on too. It would be unfair of me to cloak my laziness in preparation by saying, well, I'll just get in the pulpit and God will give me something to say.
Right.
That's just me being lazy and then expecting God to bail me out. The flip side of that, of course, is I can trust too much in the preparation, and then I'm trusting me and not him. So it has to be a balance.
It has to be a balance.
Yeah.
Do you start like with a title, with a scripture? How do you start with a thought?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a file on my phone in the notes files that is just called Sermon Starters, and I keep it active all the time. If I'm reading the scriptures, if I'm listening to somebody preach, if I'm and some verse hits me, or I'm reading something, some little thought just strikes me, I jot it in that list. And I've just got this list of stuff that just little ideas, and it's usually, most of them are very simple little things. Look at what this word means in Isaiah 14:6 or whatever, or check out these 3 things in this verse, or what. It's just a nugget. It's just an idea, sermon starter. They rest in that file sometimes for a long time before they germinate. I view it like a seed bed. They're just, and they some of them never hatch. I mean, there's some, every now and then I go back through that list, I'm like, I don't even know what I meant, and just delete it and get rid of it, Sometimes they sit in there for quite a while, and then it germinates, and I need to study that out, and it starts. I would say generally, as I begin to look at whatever that is, I go back to what I said earlier. I'm going to come up with a centralized one thesis that this is what I'm going to preach out of that. And it builds from that, not from a title per se. I don't know. Sometimes I struggle with titles, but just getting one that I really like.
Right.
The title, to me, a title is just meant to be it's like a coat hook you can hang it on. This is just something to remember it. It's not, It may not, the title may very well not communicate the thesis. It's just a memory tag that you can hang that sermon on. But I would say more often than not, I start with that thesis. This is what I want to try to communicate, and I build the sermon to do that. I had somebody ask me one time not terribly long ago, do you ever develop the sermon and then figure out what the thesis is going to be? I said, no, to me that's like shooting an arrow and then drawing a bullseye around it. Right. Hey, I hit it. Well, of course you did.
Right.
Whatever I said, that was my aim. So no, I would start the other way. I think generally I start with, this is what I want to communicate. Now, how do I effectively build a sermon that delivers that message repeatedly, consistently, concisely, clearly?
Right.
Yeah.
Is that original thesis something that was that you became curious in? Is it like sometimes a different look at a scripture, maybe that?
Quite often.
Yeah.
Yeah, many times. Again, what's interesting, again, this may be very personal. I always carry a Bible when I go to church. It's just me. I'm not knocking anybody that's got it on their phone, on their iPad, or whatever. I have it on mine too. But boy, I just feel I'm old. I feel like I'm not dressed if I don't have a Bible with me,
Right, yeah.
And so I always have a Bible physically. And I get a lot of sermon ideas while listening to preaching. And I'm not talking about, I'm going to preach what he preached.
Right.
I try to have my Bible there. And if you're preaching, Pastor, and you reference, it doesn't matter, you reference Acts 12 and 9, I'm going to try to get to Acts 12 and 9 in my Bible, and I'm going to read 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 real quickly while you're, now, depending on the pace somebody's preaching, how many verses are going to, I can't always keep up with that, but I love to do that. I hear your verse, read it in context, and I don't know if it's just because I'm more spiritually attuned in that moment, or it's just how God helps me. A great portion of things that hit me about, I wonder what that word means. I want to come in those moments.
Right.
And I'll just grab my phone, I'll jot that little idea down, or just make a note or whatever with something called an ink pen. And that's where a lot of those little ideas come from. So yeah, it's a little insight or a curiosity. I remember the author Max Lucado. I heard him speak one time, and he's a profoundly gifted author. I found him a little, well, anyway, speaking, he made a statement that it grabbed me. He said, some of my favorite places in the Bible are the white spaces between the verses. And he said, because I'll stop and think, I wonder what he was thinking right there. I wonder what he did right there. I wonder what happened here. What were the expressions on the faces of people right then? What did Jesus feel in that moment? He said, some of those things you can't know, but it's that inquisitive pondering. The Bible word is meditating on that verse. So yeah, a lot of times it's a curiosity. What does this word mean? What's that do? Hey, that phrase occurs over here. I wonder how those two verses tie together. That kind of thing that leads to some. Oh, look what the Bible's saying there. I feel like I need to preach and communicate that truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was in Bible school, they taught us in developing a sermon that you start a fire, have a good beginning, and that you build a bridge, make it something that relates to your audience. You give examples, and then you demand action. You talked a little bit about
closing,
that.
yeah.
The closing is the demand action. But, if everybody has different preaching styles, but in my opinion, if we looked at your preaching and dissected it, it seems like that there's a lot of strength in the part where you give examples and that you build a bridge. And it seems like that probably the hardest part for people that are just getting into preaching is that building a bridge. In other words, when your audience is listening, they're saying, what does this have to do with me? How do you develop that where you can put it in their backyard and say, okay, that's wonderful what all he's saying about the Bible, but what does this have to do with me? How do you build that bridge to make it something that's personal to the listener?
Yeah. Well, the unfortunate thing is, in one regard, is there's no shortcut to experience. There's a great old story here to use, since we're talking about illustrations, let me offer one. There's a great old story about it. I read about a young banker who went to an older banker. The young guy was coming into the banking industry, and the elder was about to retire. And he went to him. He said, "What's the secret to success in this industry?" And the old man kind of looked at him and said, "Make good decisions." He said, "Okay, how do I make good decisions?" Yeah. He said, "Draw on experience." He said, how do I get experience? He said, "Make bad decisions." And there's an element of truth to that. Yeah. So there's no shortcut to experience. I get that. So some of just how this applies to life is because I've lived it. I've had enough years behind me that I've had these. This is how this scripture's worked in my life. So there's some you can't shortcut that. That just comes with time. I do think there's a very effective communication tactic is to share illustrations or real life incidents or historical somethings or those kind of things. the only thing I can offer is you gotta live life with an awareness of those moments with intention. What can I learn from this? And quite often it can be humorous things that happen to you, because people relate to something strange that happened, or just I guess it's the commonalities of life.
Right.
You have a flat tire. Everybody's had a flat tire.
Sure.
Draw something out of that. What lesson can be learned out of that applies to some of the history? A lot of neat incidents and events in history that have wonderful lessons to them, or human interest stories. I'll tell you one of the. It's funny because it's an outdated publication at this point in terms of it's way past its prime. It's about half as big as it used to be. And people laugh at me, but I said, oh, laugh, that's okay. I know what I gleaned from it. The Reader's Digest, that silly little magazine that they publish monthly.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, it literally is half the size that it used to be. It's a wealth of material.
Yeah.
All because it's just human interest stuff. It's
real
this
life.
little story, this little thing that happened to this person that did so and so, this person that got involved in their community and helped beautify the city park, this person that was rescued from a car that was stuck on the tracks. It's all real life stories. People are unveiling things about themselves. It's an unbelievable resource of little illustrations. I've subscribed to it for years, and I read it with that. That's the whole reason I read it. I would, if I was not, I'm sorry, Reader's Digest, but if I was not a preacher or any kind of public speaker, I probably wouldn't subscribe, because to me, it's just to read it. It's a little hokey. I don't know. It's just like a little sappy, syrupy. I wouldn't read it. I'd be reading something on current events or something. But it's an amazing resource. Little one-liners, it's got the humor and uniform stuff, with little funny stories about the military, and it's got the all in a day's work thing about funny things happen on job site, and it's got all these little columns and stuff, and it's an unbelievable wealth of material. So I just gave away my honey hole, but there are great illustrations. So I think all that to say, I think you have to be intentional about watching for incidents, things that happen in your life, things you read about, things that happen in the news, current events things, and I've had people ask me that, where do you find all your illustrations? I said, life, same place you do. You just don't notice them as you go by them.
Right.
Be intentional. Be watching for that. And when it happens, so here's my other thing. When you find that moment, or you think of that, jot it down. Tear that page out of the magazine. Keep it. Scan it. Take a picture of it so you've got it. But every illustration you read that week doesn't have to fit in the sermon that week.
Right.
Okay? You're totally undermining your effectiveness of that if you just make it fit when it doesn't fit.
Right.
Save it. You'll preach something someday you can use that for. Don't force the issue.
Right.
You damage yourself more, because the whole idea of that illustration to me, or those kind of little things that bring it down to a human level, is specifically for that. So the person sitting there could go, okay, I got it. Oh yeah, I've lived something like that. Oh, okay. And if instead you use illustration that just doesn't fit, just think it's a neat story, you make it fit, while you're continuing your message, the person's going, I don't know, get that. You just confused them,
Right.
and you distracted them. They're like, what was that? And they're missing everything you're saying then. So done, if forced when it doesn't really apply, you do more damage to your communication than good.
Yeah.
Don't force it. Save
force
it.
it.
It'll come around.
Yeah.
It'll come, yeah.
Like most of us, we got our start in youth ministry.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I think you and I met when we were both youth presidents.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think Milwaukee, was it?
Probably.
A number of years ago.
Yeah, wow.
We're dating ourselves now, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
But, I always found that humor was a great
Absolutely.
vehicle to reach young
Absolutely.
people. Was there a point early on in your ministry where you really gave yourself permission to use humor as a part of a sermon?
I don't know if I can point to that moment. It's just kind of who I am.
Right.
I tend to be a gregarious person, like to laugh, so I don't know that I really don't know that I can do that like I could some of the others. Was there a moment? I don't think so. I think that's just who I am, which begs the observation, God didn't ask you to be anybody you're not.
Right.
And humor can be an extremely disarming mechanism. Get people laughing, they relax, you become human to them as the speaker. It can be a very disarming tool, which is a good thing. People let their guard down, then you can communicate. But only if it's natural to you. Again, it's the same thing. If you have to force it,
Right.
If you're not an inherently funny, just be you. I've told so many young preachers that just be you. God didn't call you to be me. He didn't call me to be you. Just be you. And if that is a natural, inherent thing that kind of you can do, and you can weave that into your preaching, fine. But if not, if it's forced, because few things are worse than when you land what you think's your big funny punchline, and the whole crowd goes,
right. Then you feel like you have to explain it.
yeah. So if it's who you are, fine. Let it be a part of your presentation. You have permission to be you. I've told a lot of young preachers, nothing wrong with emulating individuals that you admire or whose preaching you enjoy, and gleaning or being, perhaps the more accurate term for me is being motivated to improve in certain areas based on men you want to emulate. I could give you that list. When I was coming into preaching at 19, 20, 21 years old, these guys who were a few years older than me that I could seek to emulate. Anthony Mangan's passion, of course, again, he preached that night that I accepted my call to preach, but his passion just, I want to be like that. I marveled at Mike Williams' use of verbiage. He could turn a phrase. He was so eloquent, I marveled at Jerry Jones' capacity to structure a sermon. I used to marvel at, well, I still do, but at Wayne Huntley's ability to just find this little phrase, this word. He preached on something. I was like, I've read that 100 times. I never looked at that.
Right.
Those kinds of things. So I would see something I wanted to emulate. So tell guys, emulating preachers you admire, wonderful. Imitating preachers you admire, terrible. You don't have to imitate. God didn't call you to be anybody else except you. So circling around through all that, if humor and a lighthearted moment is something you just are able to do naturally as part of kind of who you are, then yeah, I think God knew you. He knew that about you when he called you. Be that. Use that. It's fine. Don't force it. And use it as a tool, not as a crutch. It is a tool. It's a communication tool, and that's fine.
Right.
But not just, ultimately, if the audience laughs and has fun, and then you can just pop them with that point, that's fantastic. But if they laugh and enjoy that moment and you don't say anything, then you've just become a comedian and not a preacher. So use it as a tool. Don't let it be its master, not the other way around. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Be its master and don't let it be yours.
Yeah. I remember years ago you preached a message at Youth Congress about where does the line begin?
Where's the mountain start?
Where does the mountain start?
Yeah,
and you talked about how the children of Israel were told if they touched the mountain that they would die, and their cattle and their family. And you were brought out this great observation that how do you know exactly where the mountain starts? I mean, it's kind of a gradual. And you were illustrating holiness and how that you set boundaries in your life that
and a pastor sets boundaries.
And a pastor does to give you that security so that you're not in that area where you could accidentally touch the mountain, or you could get too involved in the world not realizing that you're in that place. Can you think of some sermons maybe along your journey in this that really had an impact on you, that was one of those moments where I know a lot of times when preachers get together, they'll talk about the top 5 sermons that they ever heard. And certainly, this generation, I think, really does, they do aspire to excellence in ministry. And I think it's something that this generation is hungry for, to really know how to present the gospel in such a way that is most effective. And I was just wondering if you had 3 or 4 favorite sermons.
Well, I hate to use the word favorite because quite often some of the sermons that have impacted me the most, I enjoyed the least because they tore me up.
They tore you up,
sure. Yeah. Well, obviously that one I mentioned the night I accepted that call to preach, that will be a landmark message in my life forever. If I go back a little bit before that, before coming to grips with the call of God in terms of just, this is what I'm going to be, I'm going to live this moment, was probably a message when I was a teenager that Jeff Arnold preached called I Am Not an Egyptian. Moses made this decision, he came to a point where he had to say, no, I'm a Hebrew, I'm not an Egyptian. That was the crux of it. That was a profound night in my life when I just, I made my decision. It is. Grew up in church, of course, but I'm probably 15 or 16 years old at that camp, and it was that night that I stake my claim. That would be a very significant moment in my life. There was a night that I heard James Kilgore preach about prayer, rocked my world, changed my world and this is past licensure. This is as a licensed preacher, but just I heard that dear elder preach a message about prayer that changed me.
Right.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other, there's so many moments are flashing through my mind right now. There was a night, I'll be careful with this but there was a night just because of the times one year when we were kind of wrestling with what does the future look like? What is this? Does God know where we are? This is in ministry, but just, it was a tough season, difficult, painful season for us. And there was a night that Brother Woodward preached. I say night, it may have been a day. I don't really remember, that blurs, but he preached a message that I'll guard the title just because it would reveal a little too much, but it was a moment. It was a moment I can hang my hat on. Right. Yeah. There are certainly those moments. Yeah. I reflect on numerous at this point now that I start thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it's not all, I mean, it's interesting because I just said, I'm going to name these speakers at conferences and so forth. I remember a night in Dupo, Illinois, was the first place we assisted out of Bible school. I'm youth pastor there, like you said. Well, a lot of us got to start there. Dan Batchelor was the pastor. It's my wife's uncle. And he preached a message one night on purity. Just not... It wasn't the night he taught all these things, of course, but it wasn't the night he was teaching about ladies' hair or sleeve length, or I'm not talking about that. It was purity of heart, really. Sure. Just this quest for purity. Man, I can't tell you what that night did to me. It just, for this hunger to please God. Now, that was not at a conference. That was not, and I don't know if anybody else in that church would even remember that specific night, but it was my night. Yeah. I don't remember the title. I can't tell you the title. I just remember the crux of it. He preached about purity, this desire to please God, this desire to have a pure heart, this desire to have a pure mind. So I guess I say that, I offer that one because there is a little bit of a danger of thinking that those moments only occur at camp meeting or youth congress or whatever. And boy, those things happen on Sundays too.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. What gives a sermon longevity?
I would say a couple things for the person. Does it meet me at a point of need? I will remember a sermon that meets, like that night that I referenced about that thing. That, again, I have to be a little nebulous with this, but that thing that Brother Woodward preached because of the times was because it met me at a particular point of need.
Right.
So it's going to live forever with me.
Right.
So I think that's key, and you can't manufacture that. I can't. Other than listening to God and feeling led by His Spirit, I can't know what that person sitting on the third pew has need, where their need is. But that gives it longevity to me as much as anything. If it meets a need, I will remember that. If it met me at a crisis moment and brought direction to me, and I came there seeking a word from God, and that word came to me, that one will live forever. I mean, we can't deny the fact that the platform on which it's preached can have impact. I mean, you referenced that message at Youth Congress, the biggest audience we have. More people heard it. Right. I get that. But a Youth Congress message can die quickly even if it doesn't meet people at a point of need. So something it is in part, I think, the person who receives it. Did it meet them where they need? Secondly, I do think it has to be concise enough that you can remember it. More people can remember the phrase 7 years ago than can quote the rest of the Gettysburg Address.
Right.
So there's got to be something I can hang my hat on. There's got to be something that I can remember. There's got to be something that is just concise enough that will stay with me. And then I guess the last thing I'd offer is sermons have longevity sometimes if that wasn't my motive in preaching it. If I'm trying to bless, boy, they're going to remember this one. it's going to be so corrupted by flesh that the chances that it's going to be remembered are probably pretty slim.
Right.
It's that moment when it's all about him and not about us. It has a lot better chance to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say to a young person that's just maybe feeling their call and they're just getting into preaching? What would be your advice to them?
Well, so it starts with who you are more than what you do. Be pure, be consecrated, be devoted to God, be devoted to your craft, do the best you can, prepare, ready yourself, give it your best, and then give God the results. Give God the I'm gonna be the best I can be. I'm gonna do the best I can do, but then I'm not going to be hostage to how did it go, because then that's my ego at work. That's me being worried about what did they think of me. The great old phrase, right? That some people leave a sermon and they say, "My God, they leave and they say, "My God, what a preacher."
Right.
And others leave and say, "My preacher, what a God."
You're right.
And so that's the goal. I've used this illustration before. It's not even an illustration. It's an observation out of Scripture that may not be the interpretation of this passage, but it's I think a valid application of it. When Simon Peter walks into the Garden of Gethsemane that night with Jesus, he has his sword with him. We don't know when he went and got it, because we know when Jesus sent him out 2 by 2, he didn't take it. Don't take purse, don't take script, don't take anything when he sends out 2 by 2. And Peter puts his sword away. But he makes his boast, right, to Jesus. They're not going to get to you. They'll have to, I'll die first. And so he arms himself for that night. I don't think he understood everything that was going to happen, but there was enough there. He made his boast. They'll have to get through me first. So he arms himself. And that sword's been in a closet for a while. He ain't carried it for a little bit. Probably got a little rusty, a little dull. So, you can't go to the Last Supper with a dull sword. You can't go to the Last Supper with a rusty sword. Man, come on, this is a big moment. You can't go to that youth rally with a rusty sword. You can't step up and preach on. So pastor gave you a Sunday night service. You can't step up there with a dull sword. So he takes that sword out of the closet and shines it, takes it down to the shop, the grinder, puts an edge on it, triple aught steel wool and some polishing oil, shines it up. And when he walked into the garden that night, he was sharp. He was polished. But he didn't pray. And so when Malchus stands up in front of him and he pulls his sword out and he takes a swing, and now I've heard people say he tried to cut his head off. I don't know if that's the case. You don't cut an ear off going this way. You cut an ear off going this way. And so if I can just really stretch this to the point of breaking, he took a sharp, had to be sharp, cut off his ear. He took a sharp, polished sword and tried to pass it from Malchus's mind to his heart. But he hadn't been praying, so it only got to his ear. You can be sharp and you can be polished, but the difference between touching ears and touching hearts is your prayer life.
Wow.
So give it your best. I'm not knocking. Prepare, study, get your notes shaped, do the best you can, but then pray and give God the results. That's how you touch hearts.
That's so good.
That's how you touch hearts.
What would you say to a person that maybe is a pastor, an evangelist, or assistant pastor somewhere? They've been preaching for 30 years and they just don't feel like they have anything else to say.
Oh, man. Isn't it funny? It's so strange. And you're not a novice. You've done this too. I marvel at how there's times you're like, there is nothing left in that book for me to preach. There is nothing in there to preach. And there's other times like, I've got more things working. I don't have enough pulpit time to preach all this. I could preach that. I could preach that. To me, that's the purpose of that file I talked about on my phone. It's the Joseph principle, right? You better stock up during those 7 fat years because there's 7 skinny cows coming.
Right.
And if you haven't stockpiled and prepared, and so that's what that list is for me in part. It's just things I better write it down when God gives it to me, because there may come a time I'm like, there's nothing here.
Right.
So I know that's real. I get that. Boy, this is going to be awkward, but you can take an old sermon and rework it. Here's what I've laughed about. I mean, there are times, let's just, you and me be honest. There's times that if I said to you right now, what'd you preach 3 Sundays ago? You'd go,
2 Sundays ago.
Yeah, right, yesterday. If that's true of us, then we're a little silly to think that everybody sitting out there remembers exactly what we preached 2 months ago. Or come on. Now, I'm not saying just pick the same set of notes up and preach them identically. That's just being lazy. But you can go back and pick up something and rework it. And the simple fact is, I think all of us will discover that if you pick up a message, a core, again, that thesis that I wanted to preach, pick that up and preach that again. If it's been 4 or 5 years ago, I've gone through enough life experience. I'm not the same guy that preached it. It's going to be different. Right. And so there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with picking up that thing, letting God lead you. And He says, hey, pick that up. Let's deal with that topic again. You can do that. Don't. Right. In fact, I think there is a trap of, I got to have some new, neat thought. I've got to have some. Again, to me, that smacks of ego. I want them to be impressed with this clever thought I had. To me, that echoes behind that. What's the newest, neatest, cleverest thought? Boy, I bet this has never been preached before. Like somehow that's a feather in our cap. I'm so smart. I found something nobody ever found before. That's ego-driven. That's fleshly. That's very fleshly. So release yourself. Let yourself be free from the idea of, I got to come up with some new thought. There's probably nothing in there that somebody hasn't preached already. Right. I had one a while back. I found this amazing little story in a book at a yard sale. I was driving into my neighborhood. It's been a few years ago. I was driving in my neighborhood, and the lady had a yard sale. I'm not a yard sale guy. My wife loves it. I just don't care. But there was a little kid out there selling lemonade. His mom's having the yard sale. He said, it was hot. I admired him. So I thought, I'm going to stop, and pulled over. I didn't even really want the lemonade, but the kid was cute. I thought he's out there working hard. So I stopped and bought a cup of lemonade. I didn't want to take it in my truck, so I just drank it while I walked around. I found a book. I'm a book hound. Picked this book up, start reading it, just glancing through it. See this, bought the book for $0.25. This neat little thing. That's awesome. Ain't nobody ever preached that. And as soon as I preached it, somebody called me and said, and named a guy down south. He preached that, told that same story, preached that thing. And I said, come on. It's probably very few of us are going to find something that hadn't been preached before. So liberate yourself from that pressure.
Yeah.
Just follow the voice of the Spirit. What does your congregation need? What's that people need? Go back and recycle stuff. Sermon series to me are helps for that. Yeah. That relieves a lot of pressure of, I got to find something new. What am I going to plot out a series? I'm going to preach 6 weeks on these 6 things, and at least you have a plan. That's a liberating thing too. Yeah. I will confess in pastoring, I taught a lot of series on Wednesday nights. I did a lot of teaching in a series on Wednesday nights. I didn't do near as many sermon series when I first started. And the first one I did, I couldn't believe my church's response. They were just, man, they were energized and connected, and it spoke to me. I need to do that more often. So I did preach more sermon series later in my pastorate. That's a liberating thing too, because that gives you several weeks of here's our direction.
Right. Yeah, and gives you direction as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. That's been so good, Brother Graham. Thank you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, man.
Your friendship. Thanks for your leadership in our organization and inspiration to young ministers. And it's a blessing. We're so glad you joined us on Wind and Word.
It's been a delight. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak maybe into your life a little bit, and hopefully this was beneficial to you. We look forward to the next time we can be together, Wind and Word. And I trust God will continue to be that wind at your back and to continue to inspire you and direct you. May God keep you in Jesus' name.